Today what we want to do is cover like the basics of a bandsaw. We're looking at it kind of the aspect of your next door neighbor decided he didn't want his anymore and he gives it to you or something. So we're really looking at from how to take the bandsaw from the point that you don't know what's happening with it and adjust it, to check it out to make sure what you need, any parts or anything like that. And we want to look at it from that aspect. And if we have time, we will work on doing a bandsaw with square drawers and show you how to do that. We've got them in different phases here, so we can do that. Feel free to ask a lot of questions. You know, if you do enough questions, we don't have time for that. We'll just do the bandsaw part later on, or the box later on. So, okay. Bob and I came in this week and we did actually adjust this one up. There's a lot of things that they tell you if you go online and different ones on things to do that makes it helpful. So you can see your bearings, your bushings, or whatever you got. It's handy to take the table off. That way you can see the bottom and the top. You can open up the doors and make sure how smooth you're going and you're going there. So that's kind of an advantage. But at the same time, with these arms this long on here, when you go to take this table off, it's hard to get this thing to turn around in a position to get it out of here, out of the way. So we're not going to take the table off today. The bottom is the same as the top as far as the setup on most saws here. Here we have rollers on ours, and some of them have cool blocks, but the bottom is pretty much going to match it unless you go in with like the Carter system. The Carter system, you have one part on top and nothing on the bottom, and that holds it out from there, so you're not going to have a matching set, you know. So anyway, one of the most important things on here to talk about safety, and I became an expert last week of what not to do. I was cutting some pretty good sized logs, you know, some of the ones that Hans brought in, and they were, you know, I had the blade up about 11 inches, you know, from here, so I have that much exposed. And then I went from that and put something this big on. And I'm moving that thing around, and I went around, hit it on the back of here and just cut the back of the fingers here. Not terrible, and this is from a week ago, so you can barely see it. But at the time, all it did was scare the hell out of me. You know, and I immediately went and put bandages. I go, how bad is this? How bad is this? You know, I mean, you know, if you think about it, I was not pushing anything into the wood. You know, I was turning a piece of wood, and as I did it, and I'm putting my hand off of here, I went back and hit it. So I'm always so careful with a blade. I'm using push sticks when I'm going through there and all this stuff. And then I did something like this. I said, great, a week before I'm going to go out there and talk about safety, I'm going to go do this. So one of the things that I do.
One comment he made was he didn't get any blood on what the turning piece is.
Yeah. The wood is still pure. But what I do to prevent that, you know, you've got a guard all the way up and down here. When I had it, like I said, when I was cutting a bigger piece and it was like 10 inches exposed, you know, it was covered there good when I've got this big piece in. But when I take it out and you put a little piece in, then I had a piece this big that was open, which is stupid, and I don't do that. You know, I showed my grandson when a thing on there, and I said, you take a saw and you put it back like this, and you make sure that you got clearance so you can get underneath it. Because I have taken logs, I'm looking back here, yeah, that looks pretty good, and I get there and I get stuck. You know, so then I got to stop and turn around while I'm still doing stuff, which is a hazard. So if you can put this on and just put them back here, if you know you have the clearance that you get over there, the only thing that's going to be exposed is what blade. You know, this is going to be here, so it's going to be like this little bit. And you'd have to work to get your hand in there, and I'm not working that hard. So anyway, that's the safest way to make sure you're not doing it. You got the whole guard here, and you got the wood in the way. There's not as much chance that you're going to get your hand in there. So if you do something stupid, like keep it open like that, you know, that's your own fault. So. Okay. For adjusting on these different things, you have lots of systems to hold your blade in place.
Bring the saw out a little bit more and angle it around.
Is that good? Okay. Yeah.
You unplug?
Nope.
No. Thanks. You know, that was on our list of unplugged the saw. But anyway.
Does the list have check the list?
No. See, that's the problem. Unplugged saw. Yeah. It was on the backside. You know.
We'll hear that again next week.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, I almost forgot everything I was going to bring in today. Bob and I were making, I showed this to him. I said, okay, I want to make sure I bring this, and all these things. And I set this on the table out in the shop. And I got ready to leave today, and we're getting all the stuff together. I'm watching my daughter's dogs and my dogs. So I got 3 dogs. I'm feeding them out there and taking care of this morning. And I go by the table, oh, wow, I got to bring that. So I had to load all stuff in the car this morning. Yeah, so anyway, we got that. All right, there's several different systems, but the main systems that you're going to have for most saws, the newer saws, a lot of them are coming in with the rollers. But you always have the cool blocks where the old style that was on a lot of different ones. And your adjustment's going to be basically, you're adjusting the distance, whether you're doing it on rollers or you're doing it on the cool blocks. Now, so we're going to show it on the rollers here. I bought a Delta bandsaw, and when I got it, those cool blocks were so bad. And it's the same case. You know, I'd never used it before. I bought it, and I got a great deal at it from Habitat for Humanity. I bought a really nice one for $150. But when I got over there looking at it, the blade wasn't very good. It wasn't tracking very good. And it had cool blocks on it. And once the cool blocks wore on it, for somehow they had it at an angle. A cool block's going to be something just like this. You know, you'll have a flat part on each side, and it's going to sit there in the middle, and the blade's going to track on it. Now, if you got that off one way or another like this, it could ride on this side, but not here, and it wears down one part of the block. Well, those blocks were both at an angle. So they weren't going like this. They were like, when the blades wasn't getting caught, it was just getting hit by like a point on each side. So anyway, I was going to replace those, but I went and got the Carter system to put on there. But you can do different things with those, but the cool blocks aren't that much money. If you're going to put those on, just make sure that you got a good surface, you're holding it apart there. And then on the rollers here, on this one, the adjustment's different on every one. You know, my Jet, you open up a thing and you can just roll it by hand. There's a little thumb screw here. This one, you have to loosen it up by this Allen wrench here. And then after it's loose, that loosens up both the rollers so that you can move it, but you have to put an Allen wrench on each end to swing it. Now they're on like a, I'm not sure what you, there's like a curve on a, what's that?
Eccentric.
Yeah, they're eccentric, right. So you put your thing on there and turn it, and you can adjust it, get it where you want, and then these you don't tighten up, you know, from there. That just moves it, and this one tightens it on. So what you want to do is get enough tension on it that you can just tap it and put it on there. And you want to be able to move this, like here, you're moving it, and we're not touching any one of the 3 rollers. And if you just barely touch it, the rollers go in either direction. So you want to make it so when you're putting wood on, you're putting pressure, you can't twist the blade because it's getting caught in between there, and you don't have much flexing, especially if you're doing a lot of resawing. If you're doing resawing, you don't want that blade to be tracking off of what you did. Now, Bob and I put a new blade on this other day, and we set this one all up. But one of the things that you want to look at for, like I said, you want to make sure these are good, and then you have a thrust bearing in the back. That thrust bearing works the same way as your alignment on here, that when your blade's moving, you know, you're not touching that bearing. But if you just barely push on this, the bearing, I'm not sure if you can, yeah, you can see the bearing on the back turns with it. So you got to have it close, but not too close. And anytime you push it on the wood one way or another, where you force it any direction, you'll put that on. Now, the idea is if you can get this with a gap in between there, and you're cutting your wood, and you're being accurate enough that you're going through there, you shouldn't be hitting one side or another. If you're not twisting it a little bit, and if you are twisting it, you know you're doing it the wrong way, just, you know, if you're making a bearing move, you're doing something wrong. Now, the back bearing is going to move, because as soon as I put just a little bit of pressure, that back bearing's turning. But you need to have that like that. If you can't solve the problem by backing the bearing up, but already got a gap, because then your blade is going to be flexing when you do it. Okay, the bottom and the top of this one are exactly the same. You know, you have the 2 side bushings here, and they all adjust the same. Now, everyone's going to be a little different as far as the setup, but basically you're going to have the same unit on each one. When you're putting your blade on, there's a lot of things to look at, and just make sure you have the right blade for this. We put a 3/4 inch blade on because I wanted it to be a wider blade, so when we're doing the resaw, we didn't have any play in there. You know, you can do it with like even a 3/16, you can make a lot of cuts on. Now, when you're cutting bandsaw that has box that has a rounded drawers, you need one that's only like 3/16 so you can make the sharp turns. This one we're going to do is all straight cuts. You have no turns on it, so we put this blade on here. So when we put it on, one of the things you want to look at, you want to make sure you know, first of all, if you're getting bandsaw from somebody else, something, you want to check the tires on it. Make sure that you've got the rubber and stuff on here. I'm not sure that we can actually even get to the rubber will be underneath it. But you want to make sure that it's not deformed. You know, they come in with all kinds of different newer types of rubber you put on it. I think it's like a polyurethane instead of rubber. And there's no advantage to taking off a rubber one that's working good to put the polyurethane on, even though polyurethane ones are nice. So I wouldn't do it just for that, but if you have a problem with it, you're going to replace it, I would look for getting a polyurethane to put on there. So.
What would be the symptoms or problems with your tire?
Well, if you got the blade on, see right here where the blade's at, the kerf of the blade, the teeth itself, those are setting off. You know, if you're flat on top and it's setting off on there, is where it should be. These teeth actually, you know, everybody talks about you should have your blade tracking in the center of the wheel. Well, what you really want to have is the part right behind the teeth, right behind the gullet there, right there. That part is what's supposed to be tracking in the center. You know, which we're maybe a little bit more farther this way, but if you don't, if you got these teeth that are right on the wheel, each one of the teeth that's set on there is going to go in there and be tearing up the wheels here. So you always want to make sure, if anything, that at least the teeth are off that part, so where it crowns on there, they're setting on there, you're not tearing up the wheel. And you just overuse, so, you know, you get one that's 15, 20 years old, there's a good chance it's messed up, you know.
Yeah, some further answers to your question there. One of the symptoms would be vibration, which is most often manifested by the fact that the tire slips on the wheel.
Okay.
That is oftentimes difficult to tell unless you take one of those silver or white Sharpies and mark the tire and the wheel separately, and then proceed to start cutting with it. And when you notice the vibration and misbehavior going on, then go take a look at that mark again and see if it's moved.
Oh, gotcha.
Bet it will. In a case like that, what you wind up doing is after you get the tire on there, you could stick a dowel underneath the tire and chase that thing around with an acid brush and some glue, and actually glue that tire onto the wheel.
Okay.
That'll stop that behavior.
Okay. You can also, like he's talking about running rough like that, that can be caused by a lot of things. It can be your blade might be twisted. You know, I've had blades that I put on and I got it caught one time and just turned it a little bit. From that point on, it never cut right. You know, and now if you're cutting logs, you really don't care. I'm not worried about a precise cut when I'm going through to just sawing a log in half. But when you're cutting, you know, kiln dried wood and you're just trying to resaw, and you want to make sure that's perfect, if you got that sets off a little bit, that blade's never going to cut right for you. Okay. Along with, like he's saying on there, if that's slipping, you know, if you go on the back here, you can feel like the sawdust stuff that's built up over time. If you get some bigger stuff that gets in there, you know, or even your wood gets embedded, you got some wood that you left it after the last time you didn't put it on there, that will make your blade go bump, bump, bump every time it goes around, which, you know, you'll feel that a lot. On the bottom of this, can you see, you probably can't see down there, don't worry about it. There's a brush that runs around your wheel on the bottom here that knocks most of that off. Can you get it into right there? Okay. It's right here on the brush. Okay. You know, on my jet, mine's on the front and sticks over there, and you put it on there. And that keeps it, every time this thing goes over there, it cleans out. There is nothing like that on the top wheel, it's just on the bottom. But you can take the top wheel and hold a thing of like the Scotch-Brite pad or something on there, and keep your hands away from there and just spin it and keep going over there and clean it up. You know, a lot of times I've had that because if you're cutting logs, you end up with the rougher green wood that doesn't stay with it and just fall down with the sawdust. And I get it packed in along here, and when it comes up, it gets on there, and you get that stuff in there. So I make a point of cleaning that out.
Not all saws have that brush.
No, I don't. I'm not sure. I don't think my Delta does either.
There are aftermarket, it's on the wall of it.
Oh, an aftermarket brush? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
And if you don't, like I said, if you don't want to do that, you know, just some sort of scrub brush or toothbrush or something in there will do the same, has the same effect.
Yeah, I've actually seen people on the internet that have taken abrasive brush, a stiff bristle brush, and mounted it themselves, you know. Yeah.
Rob, going back to the cool blocks, when they start to wear unevenly, is it okay to sand it down flat?
Yeah.
And then you grease it again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the thing on the cool blocks also, not only you can sand it down, they're longer than what they need to be, you know, and you can use both sides. So if the one end gets worn down or, you know, it's not facing good, you can either sand that down or you can turn it around. But you got to make sure you have plenty, because once you get it down, you know, it's got like a clamp on there, and it'll stick out normally, you know, about this much on each side, you know, enough to go on there. But if you push it too far where you're not clamping and you don't have both the clamp on all the way straight flush, then it's going to tilt on you and it's going to affect your blade. But yeah, you got a few options. You can replace it, you can resand it. You just got to make sure you get it square. And it doesn't have to be perfect. All it's going to do is hold the blade in place. So you can sand that, or you can turn it around and use the opposite side, and they last for quite a while, you know. And the big thing that tears them up is if you don't have your blade aligned right. If you got these teeth in here, the gullet, that's touching against that cool block, it's going to tear it up quick. Here, it'll mess up your bearing some, but it's not going to mess it up as bad. One thing, if you got this thing where it's riding on that bearing all the time, you're damaging the blade, but you're damaging those bearings a lot, the bushings. You know, if you got that and you're solid the whole time you turn it on, my rollers are about that big on the 18-inch jet. And if I got that on and it's solid on it, it makes a noise. You know, you can hear how bad it's doing. So rather than finish a cut, you know, I will stop and, you know, adjust it again if I do that again. You know, and each time that you go out there and put a new blade on, you know, there's different steps. And I guess we will cover a little bit about the blades itself. But one of the first things Bob and I did the other day was I wanted to use a 3/4 inch blade. We had to get the book out and make sure, you know, how wide a blade you can get. 3/4 is the biggest you can put on this bandsaw. You know, and I don't have a bigger blade at my house. I have an 18-inch bandsaw, but I can't see having, you know, a 1-inch blade. Now, I went over to Jim Cummins-Weiler's. He has a bandsaw that he uses for resawing, and I think the blade is 3 inches, you know. But I mean, it's so long and tight, it's just perfectly dead on accurate. You know, so if I'm doing a lot of resawing, you know, several things, not just a board or two, we go over to his house. Yeah, it works great.
So once you twist that blade, even the slice now, it no longer tracks.
Well, that's true with any of the blades. You know, the wood slicer that they sell from Highland Woodworking, that works beautiful. Just if you're out there like this and you're cutting, you know, wood that's been kiln dried and it's all ready to go, you have no trouble with it cutting it there. But the first time you take that thing, you make a twist on it while you're doing it, you know, like you were trying to make a curve, you'll never get that blade to work right again. So it's going to be fine as long as you ever use it. I've got one, a 3/4 inch for that, and I thought it was great, but I can't use it for anything else, so I don't bother putting it on. If I'm going to put it on and make one cut and take it off, that's kind of a waste of time. So then I get the lower price blades, and I don't have much trouble with them. You know, my original blade I had on that, you know, every time I would cut a log or something, I put that blade on. It was super tough. You know, it's just like it was a 3/4 inch, and I had that thing for like 6 or 7 years. You know, I mean, if I'm cutting logs, it doesn't matter, but when I go to cut something else, usually for resawing at the house, I use a 1/2 inch blade, you know, a 3-tooth 1/2 inch blade, because I'm just working on going straight with it, and it works fine. If I'm doing logs, I don't care. I just want something to cut it. Yes?
When I was, first time I saw, I thought, well, I gotta have the widest blade it'll handle. So I went out, not only did I buy a 1-inch blade, which is what the maximum will go on it, I bought a carbide tip one.
Yeah.
At like $220. I thought, I'll be set for life. But that thing is such a pain in the booty to put on there. It rarely gets used. And you're so afraid that you're gonna bend it when you're putting it on. It's a pain. It's not worth it.
Well, mine will last for, the one I got is going to last for life too, because I'm never taking it out of the cabinet again. Yeah. Go ahead, Howard.
I'm just saying, don't go crazy with blades. It's not worth it.
Also at Rob's shop, and I don't think you really mentioned, he's got a jet and he's got this other saw he got at the
Habitat for Humanity.
Habitat for Humanity. But the one saw he only uses for resawing, and so that blade only does straight.
I mean, that's all, he only wants to do straight. He hasn't told it how to turn yet, so it only goes straight, so therefore, it doesn't have any, memory,
Yeah.
whatever you call it.
Now the thing is, when I'm cutting logs and stuff with that, you know, to cut them straight on the log, you're going straight across and it is straight. But if I'm taking it, after you cut it down, you got a half a log, you're trying to turn it into a bowl blank, you are sometimes, you know, you're maneuvering something that's, you know, 50, 60 pounds sometime, and I try to get square cuts off a thing, and I'm not trying to round it. But if I'm using like a 3/4 inch blade, I try to get it straight to. But you are messing up a little bit if you turn it on there, you know, so you just avoid it whenever you can.
Rob, if you're, how good should you expect to get with resawing? If you're resawing on, say, an 8-inch board to 1/8 inch thickness, 4 foot long, you may take a caliper along that. How, plus or minus, what would be the tolerance that you'd want to?
You know, the biggest thing, I try to have the board so it's not 4 foot long. If you got a board that's like 18, yeah, if you have one that's like 18 inches, it's easy to control. If you put your fence up against there and you push it on something 4 foot long, you know, I'm not sure if you can get it on here, but I would be holding the blade on the board on this side against here and controlling it this way against the fence. Well, from there, it's hard, you know, as you get by, because you're moving your hand and adjusting it, so you're letting the board go back and forth. So if you get an 18 inch, I can hold it on here, and I can push it right into the blade nice and smooth. And I can easily cut off, you know, a 16th inch or something like that.
Well, the best I could do recently was about a 64th of an inch, plus or minus. Is that,
Yeah.
should that be good? Should I try to get better than that, or is that?
Sounds pretty good to me.
Well, you know, the thing is, most of the times once you make a cut and you're done like that, a lot of times you're going to end up sanding the sides anyway. You know, so a 64th is great. When I was making these the other day, we put a pattern on it, and we made the pattern a little bigger. Well, I like to make these, and I'll go over it later, but I like to make the wood for the box about a 1/4 inch bigger or more on each side, so when you cut it, you're close. On these ones, I had about a 16th of an inch that I was taking off of the sides, on the two longer sides. So when I was cutting it, I was trying to make it dead accurate there, and it's harder. It's better when you got more wood hanging off. When you're just skimming some off, you know, I had a bunch of sheets of paper out of this when I was done, you know, so.
The reason I asked that is I like to do some cut some veneer, and I don't want to, you know, 64 sounds like a lot, pretty close, but if you're cutting really thin veneer, that's a lot, really.
Yeah. You can cut your strips down to veneer.
Now, what throat depth do you have in your saw? What height?
Well, I have it up to 14.
Okay, so it's a 14-inch saw? Yeah.
I think the key to something like that is to have a table to support that 4 foot while you're going through, so that you don't have, you know, it's a little easier to control. You don't have to carry the weight.
Right.
You're just pushing through.
You can easily do the 4 foot and everything, but,
People.
you know, 2 people is a big answer. When we started making these ones here, Bob glued up 7 boards together, and it was about 5 foot long. And we were going to cut them off in sections, and our theory did not work right, so we had to do something different with that. He didn't use enough glue.
You couldn't find any in your shop?
I have lots. He didn't use enough. Yeah. But when we went to cut it in sections to smaller sections on there, they started laminating and came apart. So, which wasn't a problem. But the thing is, when you're going to do the long sections on that, like I said, you can resaw like that. You can, if you have the capabilities, you can put a magnetic the featherboard against there that would hold it. Like the problem I was having when I'm not using the featherboard is, you know, trying to hold this over towards the blade. And if you got a fence and you're trying to do a really thin cuts on there, it'll cut it perfect. The only thing is you got to keep it against there the whole cut. And there's nothing wrong with doing a 4 foot board. I've done plenty of things that I've cut with that, or taken a 1/4 inch off of a long board. And you know, we've had some of them that we had like a 3/4 inch board that was about that high, and we took it down to, you know, 3 different boards and divide up as close as we could. You're going to lose a little bit out of the kerf on there, but you get a, you know, 3/4 inch board, you get a little less than a 1/4 inch, and you get 3 pieces out of it, and you cut that nice and smooth, you know. The biggest thing is having a blade that the teeth aren't messed up or anything, you know, they're all nice and straight. You can cut it with no problem.
To further answer Charlie's question a little bit better, is that if you're regularly going to resaw something like that, the bigger saw the better. Like Rob and I each have 18-inch jets. I purposely got one like that because most of my stuff is straight work, and a fair amount of it is resaw. And it's not unusual to resaw a piece and wind up with, you know, tolerance, maybe 25 thousandths or something like that. You know, a little bit better than your 64th that you were talking about. Also, the choice of the blade, the style of the fence. So if you've got a fence extension that'll get up to support whatever board you're going to resaw,
But that
that all helps
where I was
too.
going, where my next step was taller fence and taller feather board, one on top, one on the bottom.
Yeah,
And
yeah, all those things help. Something Rob hasn't mentioned yet, you stop me if I'm treading on your turf there, but
I haven't got turf, go ahead.
blade choice
yeah,
makes a huge difference. If you're sawing something as thick as one of these boxes, a common mistake a lot of people will make is they think, well, if I want to get a real smooth cut, I'll pick a fine blade. That's the wrong choice. Because what winds up happening is you need to think about the number of teeth that are engaged in the full length of what you're cutting. In machining, if you've got about somewhere between 3 and 5 teeth engaged in what you're cutting, that's about the right amount. Same follows with woodworking too. Now, when you're cutting something as thick as one of these 6 or 7 inch wide boxes, you got no choice but to have more than 3 teeth involved. Otherwise, you're gonna wind up with a blade that, you know, a 100-inch blade like this is only gonna be 5 teeth on it. But generally, what I'll do on a resaw blade is I'll pick one that's about 3 teeth per inch. That makes sure that when the blade fully involves a piece of wood, you know, it's got a chip in the gullet. It makes sure that thing can get out before it starts galling up, and when it galls up, it spreads out to the side, and that's what starts making your cut rough. So you want to make sure and go slowly when you're doing a big thick cut like that. That will also help make your cut just really smooth, more so than a fine tooth blade. Yes, Hans?
We were talking, and I know your jet came with it, Rob's jet came with it, mine came with it. Most of them come with a stainless steel pole that's about this high and round, and it fits in there. So you know, to resawing in theory, to keep it so you could guide it straight and get the proper thickness. But now I've gone to a back, you know, magnetic backboard on the whole thing. What's the difference, pros and cons of the two methods?
A lot of people will take that resaw guide like that. A lot of people swear by them. I swear at them. I promptly take the thing off of the fence and put it in this big box that I've got for spare accessories for all my power tools. What I prefer to use is a rigid fence, not rigid brand, but rigid as in stationary, and then use a fence extension that I made out of MDF. You know, that extends the length of the fence and the height of the fence. You know, similar to this. We got this one for this particular saw because it's a magnetic switch. You give this thing a quarter turn, and I think it locks when it does. Yeah, like that. And that engages a rare earth magnet on here. You get both of these things front and rear, and you can hang on it, and it won't come loose. The only disadvantage to this one is you need to do equal measurements from your miter slot to make sure that it's parallel. But I much prefer using a parallel fence like that to do resaw activity with. If you've got if you've got your blade properly adjusted, you know, it's tracking properly, you've got the right choice of blade in terms of number of teeth and the material, you'll get perfectly straight cuts. If you're cutting at an angle, there's something else wrong. It's like the set of the teeth is wrong. Again, as Rob indicated earlier, pick a blade that you're going to use for resaw and only do straight cut to it, and you'll be well ahead of the game. Yes, sir.
So you just mentioned measuring from the miter slot to the fence to get your distance set.
Yes.
Now, you read all the time about talking about the blade drift, and it's not going to be at the same distance or same angle. How does that come into play with what you were just talking about?
Repeat the last of that.
You read all the time about how you have to account for the blade drift, and now you're going to go at an angle, so it wouldn't be the same distance from the miter slot. How do you account for that? I mean, what is that something that you really have to? I mean, can you really go with a parallel fence?
You
Sure.
should be able to go with a parallel fence. If a parallel fence will not make a straight cut, there's something wrong with your blade.
It's your setup at the time. It's either blade or you got this. There's no reason why this thing would be twisting enough that you'd have to be skewing it to get over there. You should be getting a straight cut each time when you're doing that. No.
I mean, I go through my experience with that. I bought a used Grizzly, and when I brought it in, I couldn't resaw with the darn. It just would drift and wouldn't. I went through and completely adjusted the machine, put it up, and now it's got a built-in fence that's locks to the table and parallel to the blade. I put it through and it's perfect every time. There's no drift at all, and so you need to just get this saw adjusted correctly if you're getting drift.
Yeah, I had a problem like that.
It's where the gullet is on the tire. It's where you get a lot of
Okay.
That gullet needs to be as close as you can put it to the middle of that tire. You can't do it on a big blade, but a big blade's not so susceptible. But a 3/16 blade needs to be so that the teeth have tension on the front part, on the gullet part of the teeth.
So the gullet should be centered, and the teeth should just obviously then would be just to the front of that.
Yeah, that's right. That's where you run into trouble.
I had a problem with a carbide blade. I could not get it to track
Yeah,
at all.
They don't like it.
And I ended up sending that back to Laguna.
Do what?
To Laguna, and they sharpened it and sent it back to me, and it worked fine. It worked perfectly after that. And I had a friend that had two of those. He had the same problem. Sent it back to Laguna. They replaced them, and so they had some kind of problem where you couldn't saw straight with their resaw King blade.
I can get mine to saw straight, but it's a hassle.
And I think I did the same thing you did. I made a mistake and bought the 1-inch blade.
Shouldn't.
And I don't think you can get enough tension on a small bandsaw with a 1-inch blade. But the other thing, as far as tracking parallel to your slot, I've read, and I haven't tried this, but I've read that just minor adjustments to the tracking will, if you're not tracking parallel to your slot, just tweak that tracking a bit, and I can't remember which way, but it'll fix that. But you have to have a blade you have to have a blade that's equally sharp on both sides, otherwise it's not going to work at all.
And also the tensioning adjustment, because you have to, at least on my saw, I have to change the tensioning adjustment based on the width of the blade. And if I don't do that, then I have trouble with the tracking. So I've got to make that, if I change blades from a 3/16 to a ½ inch, I better make that adjustment on the blade to make sure that I'm tensioned for a ½ inch blade and it tracks much better.
Jimmy, you had a question, Victor?
Yes, if you would, sometime in the discussion, if you would, comment on tuning the table to the kerf that the blade makes, so that the table and the miter is square to the line of cut.
Okay, I'm going to cover some other things about the table when we get ready to do that too. Okay, on this one that Bob's showing there that looked like he's about to say something about it. We covered. I do like to cut it when I've got a thicker piece, I'm doing like a 1/4 inch or thicker for resawing, I use the fence just like Bob does. But if I'm doing a piece like this bandsaw box, I had to cut the back off. And I'm cutting this piece off the back of it. Well, it's easier for me to look at the line on there and just cut straight across without doing that. And that's what the purpose of that is. When you've got that thing sitting there where you can control it, you put a line on, you're going across there, you're controlling it yourself. If you're using a thin piece, you're only cutting like an 1/8 inch off of that. As you're cutting that off, you're pinching it between the board and stuff, which if you got enough of the kerf on it, you're okay. But if I'm doing something thicker, I definitely will use the fence. But if I'm only doing like an 1/8 inch, like I was doing on some of these and cutting off the back on here, less than a 1/4 inch, then I take it and I'll do it freehand. You know, and to do it freehand, you're gonna have a little bit of wobble, but if you're using that and you're going freehand, you're able to use the two together. You know, so this is holding it, you're not holding it straight, and then you just push it through. It cuts really good with that. Anyway, what I found out, I've got a Delta table. My Delta table is a lot smaller than this, and when I would put it across, it would only clamp onto this side. The magnets would be hanging over there, so it wouldn't do any good for me. All right, so you know, we use a fence like the regular fence that I've got is what is it, Craig, that we have on ours?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I took off the jet fence that came there and I put the Craig fence, and I really like it. But, and then you got the tall part on here that you can put on here. But when you go in to put it on, if you're doing the resawing, the short part in here doesn't quite do it if you got like a 6 or 8 inch board that you're putting through there. So you have the capability of putting the screws, you got a bolt going through here and, you know, and a nut on into the screw. And you can put whatever fence you want. I've got a couple of mine's probably about that high. And if you're doing a tall fence, it's nice to have the fence here just about as tall as wood. Doesn't have to be as much, but get it close. Now, if you're using a magnetic fence, you've got to get it pretty well centered on here without having a problem. I made this fantastic jig. Didn't take me much work, but I can put that down. Now, I was doing certain cuts that I had to have on there. And I would put this down in the slot, and I put this here, and then check the other side, make sure I was good, and then just tighten it down, and that way you know you were straight across. And if you did a certain cut over and over again, which, you know, I did this for maybe for a bandsaw or something at one time that I wanted to cut off exactly a 1/4 inch, you can put it like that. So you got to make sure that you do it in consideration that you were going to be using this board on here and whatever you're doing. And you can make 3 or 4 of those. If you had a habit, you made little boxes that you were passing out to people, and you did a 1/2 inch cut in different ones, and you wanted to line it up. If you're using this type of fence, just make something like this. You know, you put it on and cut it to the size you want, and after that, you have no problem. You know, so.
Have you found that in your process of cutting, like resaw and thin stock, like that, that where your keeper part of the wood is between the fence or on the other side? I've heard some
I do it on the other side.
So
I try to put the main part of the wood here. If I'm just taking off like a 1/8 inch or something like that, I put the main part of the wood here and push it through here, and the part drops off. That's the part I want to keep.
That's your keeper part.
Yeah.
I do just the opposite, and I think it's just a matter of preference and what works for you.
Is 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the
Yeah,
other?
I think so.
Actually, I think it's a matter of the thickness of the wood. If I'm doing anything, if I'm doing like a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch or something like that, I've always got the wood on this side. But if I'm trying to do a thin layer, you're just taking layers off, then I put it over here because everything I put on there is going to drop off. If you're doing something like a 1/16, and you're trying to get over here where you're only taking a 1/16 off, and you got that close to there, I've done that before, and actually, my metal fence itself, I've actually cut into it, because as I'm going through here, it came through and just hit the fence. You know, so if I'm doing real thin ones, I do it, you know, the opposite like this. If I'm doing anything from a 1/4 inch or bigger, then I put it where, you know, I've got the fence up to there and I cut there.
So basically you're having to reset your fence every cut.
Yeah, but my fence isn't like this. It just, you know, it's got the measurements here. I just put it right where I want it. So, I mean, it's real easy for that. I mean, this takes a little long. And you're not going to be changing back and forth either time, you know. If you want to make a bunch of thin strips, you know, usually when you do it, you set it up and you're going to do, you know, 50 or 60 at a time, so you've got them later, or however many you do. So, you know, it's not like you're going to be going back and forth. You know, so, okay. When we set this up the other day, we did look at the blade and the table. When I first put it on there, I looked at it and it was way off. I'm thinking, is that the blade? But it was actually the table. You loosen up the, you know, you have a part on the bottom here, a handle on both sides, and it sits in like a little rocker there, where pretty much it's not going to tilt this way. You know, it's got to set in a slot where it's not going to move. But when you get it on there, if you loosen those up, your table will go up and down however you want to whatever game. That's how you put your angle cuts on there. So we set it up, did it, and then brought our part on here. And one thing, when you're raising this thing up and tighten it up like that, you got to make sure you tighten that up. If you don't tighten it up, you're not going to get the right tension on here. You know, because this is able to move while you're cutting, you've done away with all your measurements on there. So if you put this on here like this, and then you look at your gap, which we are a hair off here. But anyway, you look at it from top and the bottom, and I'm not able to get it enough on there.
May have to adjust your stop.
I did, that's why it's wrong. I wasn't going to mention that.
Been there.
Actually, it looks pretty good from this direction. So maybe what it is I'm filling this part here while I'm doing it and throwing it on there. There is a stop. You have a bolt like a lot of things that have a trunnion that it goes down. The default stop's going to stop right at the right spot. That's why I was shocked when it wasn't looking right there. So anyway, you have a bolt that's on this side, and all it is a stud coming up, and you can turn the bolt by hand, but you have a nut that locks it down to keep it from there. So if you want to keep it straight, you make it sure that way. I don't hardly ever change the angle of my table, but if you got it right and you check it once in a while, you know, it'll put on there. While you're on that side, Dan, okay, on this Powermatic, there's certain features, if you get one of these, you got to be careful with. And it's somewhat the same thing with the Delta. This mechanism right here on the Delta and Powermatic are identical. You know, I'm not sure where they get them from, a third party or whatever. There's a washer on there, a red washer, and I'm not sure if we can get in there to pick it out. Okay, there it is. Okay, now that red washer is your marker to tell where your adjustment's at. You tighten it up by the knob that's on top, tighten it, loosen it, and you're better off if you're putting these on there to loosen it up, loosen what you want. If you make an adjustment, loosen it up and then tighten it to the tighten side. So you're putting tension on it, you're not loosening it off. Your adjustment on the wheel to make sure you're not riding on the wheel in the wrong spot. You know, if you look at it and you're going too far over to the left or too far to there when you're looking at it and your blade is not riding in the middle, then you take this wing nut loose and then you take and move it here. But you have to take all the tension off first. You release the tension, or, you know, unscrew
What Rob said there is not to be taken lightly. You got to take the tension off the blade in order to make that adjustment. Otherwise, you're going to be buying new parts for the saw.
Yeah.
Not that that ever happened.
No.
I can tell you that this is not the original parts. The first time Bob went to adjust it, he broke this thing off. And I thought, how could you be that dumb? Next time I adjusted it, I broke it off. So, anyway, you lift this thing. I was going to take this ball off of here. Let me make some little changes here. I'm not sure we're going to get to the bandsaw here, but okay. Now, on here, I thought that was kind of a bad system as far as their design. Not that we're telling Powermatic this, but this ball, when it's up here and you've got this raised up, they hit each other. And you cannot get that thing in the right place with it on there because it just pops in. And if this is all the way up and you go to take this off, you can't get it past there without really forcing it to come off of here. Now, on here, there's 3 positions on this part here. This is the actual operational position that you want. There's a catch here, and up here. This is the position you want it when you're using it. When you get done using it, it's supposed to be better for your blade and better for the tire to take the pressure off. So you kind of lift it up a little and you pull it out and you put it there. That's like a rest position. That's not your operational position. And when we first got it, we were using it here because we could not get this thing forced to go up there. And that's how I broke it, and that's how Bob broke it. We're forcing it as hard as we can. And it turns out, if you can get right into this part here, right on the bottom of here, which you can't see it now, but there is a square sleeve in there. and it's about this thick, and it fits right in that tractor where that part goes up and down. If you loosen up enough tension, that thing will come down below this point, which is okay, but when you go to start putting the tension on, if that thing's not turned right, where it goes straight, the square part goes in the square there, it hangs up below, and you keep tightening this tension over and over again, you will break the whole mechanism inside of here. That bolt there, that's between here and here, breaks. And you have to take the whole, we didn't have this thing 5 minutes worth of use before we broke it and had to order parts for it and do that. And then that took me a couple weeks before I broke it. But that was the reason. See, what happened was we got it there and we got it adjusted up where that thing what it was. But then when I went to put the tension on, I'm stretching it even farther. You should be able to go from here without any problem doing it, but.
Now, what happens is that square nut comes down below the casting and turns just slightly, and you don't notice it. You're trying to get the tension back on the thing, and you're pulling that square nut up against the casting, and you wind up shearing some of the mechanism off.
Yeah, the actual bolt on the back here is what we sheared off. The only reason we're saying that is if you get one of these, don't do what we did. And we called the people about that, and Powermatic, and said, yeah, that'll do it. Oh, duh. There's no warning, there's no nothing. You just back it off and it was wrong. So now when you get ready to change the blade or you go to change the tilt of the wheel, you take this one more spot and you put it here. Now in that position there, you got play in the blade and you still have to undo the part on here, but that takes all your tension off, you undo the blade and then you go put it where you want to put it. So there's just 3 positions, just so you know. When we first started using it, we were using it in the middle position and it was cutting pretty good. We had no idea it had to go up there. We wrote the instruction that said it has to go up there, but I can't get it up there. Well, once I tried to get it up there, I broke the ends off. So, anyway, so like I said, this is your rest position. So when you get done using it for the day, I don't take the tension off of mine, but when you got the points, especially if you have them in the wrong position where your actual teeth are pushing onto your tire and making an imprint in there, and if you do it and you're moving once in a while, it's not bad, but if that's sitting there for weeks just like that, you could be messing up the top of your tire. So I don't take the pressure off of this. This is a great system if it's used right and you know enough about it.
The moral of Rob's story there is if you have any suspicions about the proper assembly of a machine that you've just purchased, check it. What you're seeing here is this is what is known as a hybrid saw. Powermatic put out this model, and it's a joint venture concept between Carter and Powermatic. So what happened is Carter provided Powermatic with this much of the assembly, and they also provided them with the riser block, which takes the 14-inch saw and raises it up so you get an effective resaw of, 18, 20 inches, something like that. But what you wind up with in the process is, a custom saw. You do pick up the nice features of a roller assembly, the Carter tensioning system, all that type of thing. But one of the next things that we noticed is that when you rely on the model plate on the saw, it calls out one model, but it doesn't acknowledge that you've got this kit on there. So you start trying to buy a blade for this thing, and you may not be able to get the right blade the first time. So what I have learned over the years is with bandsaws and so forth, one of the first things I do is I write the length of the blade on the inside of the cover. That way you kind of get that burned into your brain when you go buy a new blade for it, you know which one to get. Whereas when a lot of the stores and so forth will go into, well, what model saw do you have? And they're trying to answer the question for you. Another thing that I've got on my saw at home, I don't know if I did the same thing with Rob's, but one of the traditional charts that you use for blade depth compared to the radius of blade that or radius of cut that you can make. I take and make a copy of that chart and also put that on the inside cover. So when I'm trying to make a circle or some kind of a big curve, I'll choose the right blade to put on it. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, you guys use some real interesting, things, but generalist, what would you say the blades you should have are? What's, if you have a
I like a 3/8.
typical saw,
I can use a 3/8 for almost anything. If I'm not resawing something tall, if it's only like 4 inches tall or something like that, I can use 3/8. I can use 3/8 for a lot of wood.
so you'll even use 3/8 even if you're resawing, if
Yes.
it's not a high thing.
Yeah, if you're trying to do it, it's like 6 inches tall and you're doing it, and you're trying to do that, well then that's a little much. But if you don't, a lot of strips you're only doing it's like 3 or 4 inches, and I've got 3/8 blade. If I got the tension right, in fact, when I do the resawing, I take my tension, I adjust my tension a little bit longer, a little bit tighter than what it calls for in the book. If you look at it and it says to go to 1/2 inch, if I'm going to do resawing, I would take that a little tighter than 1/2 inch. And one thing you got to look at when you do the resawing, if you've had this saw for 10 years, and this thing says 1/2 inch, well, with everything stretching and the different play in there, it'll change it where you no longer, the 1/2 inch doesn't make a difference. It's kind of irrelevant when your blades are stretching and everything else. So basically, I go out there and I do about what it says on there, and then I'll check the tension. If it says it's 1/2 inch, but I've got too much play in here, then I'll tighten it up. So that's kind of a guide, but your parts will wear out. The spring and stuff is going to wear out sometime, and the more this compresses, like you're saying, if it wears out and you compress it down, and you could have it a little looser than what you want going by the gauge. The new ones like this is going to be pretty accurate each time. And like I said, each time I do actually go a little tighter. Hans?
If you over tighten it, what do you do? Causing more wear and tear on the wheels, or?
I think the only thing that would happen to over tighten it, if you get really too tight, you can make the blade a little brittle. These are all welded. You see, like right here would be the spot on this blade where it was welded. And that should hold good, but most of the blades, when they do break, it breaks at the weld point there. So if you're putting too much tension on it and you just barely turn it one way or another, you have a better chance of snapping it. Yes.
Also going to cut into the tires, or put extra wear on the tires?
If you have too much tension on it, you can definitely put more of an indent in the tires. But if they're sitting like here, where the whole flat spot is on the tire, it's not going to hurt much. So like it says, even if that old flat spot sitting on the tire, and you take the tension off, there's nothing going to be flattening out that tire. So it won't hurt a thing. Just, I don't take the tension off because my bandsaw is used, several days a week. But if you have one that you don't use your bandsaw, I mean, that's probably one of my favorite tools next to glue. Yeah, that's it. But anyway, if you're using it all the time, it isn't bad. Anything that sits, like even your car tires, if they sit there flat on the bottom and you don't move it for a month, and you start driving, especially with the radial tires, you'll feel like a thump until it warms up and smooths out. It's the same thing on here. If you've got to sit there for a few weeks and you don't use it, you turn on, you can hear the thump, and then it'll smooth out after a while. That tire, the rubber is pliable enough that you'll have a flat spot, but as soon as it starts running a little bit, it'll smash it all down together.
Very near and dear to me, and I think everybody else probably agree with it. Dust collection.
The volume of dust that's going to come off your bandsaw itself, whether you have a hose that's 2 inches, 4 inches, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. The one that you're talking about, if you've got it on the front, it's got a little thing that snaps in place. My Delta's got that. It helps, but it's very inefficient. When the dust is falling through here and it comes down there, it's almost like a cup on there and it comes over there to pick it up. It does make a difference. I can keep my area a little cleaner. The top of my table is just as filthy one way or another. It's not very efficient. My dust collector has got the big port, this side off the side of it. And I have a 5 horsepower dust collector. I still get stuff that comes off that's on the top of the table. So dust collector, a bandsaw is not going to be the most efficient for dust collection. You're going to get majority of it up. The biggest thing you got to do though, when you got a dust collector on it, you turn it on every time you're making a cut. If you're making a small cut and you're just doing a little bit, and you don't turn the dust collector and you do it again and again, eventually that stuff is going to get under your wheel. It's going to drop down from here. Because like your blade, when it gets down the bottom, it's going to drop down there, and that dust is going to get in between the blade and there. And so you're going to end up having, that's why the brush is there, because it's going to drop on there. So the best idea is every time that you go to use that thing, to go out there and take it and make sure you have the dust collection. I try and remember to turn it on every time. I have the remote thing that I hit for there, and I open up that one and I do it. 90% of the time, even if I'm doing small cuts, if I'm doing pin blanks, I might cut a couple of them, but if I'm going to do like 10 of them, like we did last night, I'll turn on the dust collector.
This filter in yours is on the front of the table, on your desk?
No, mine's on the bottom, on the side,
One side.
on the jet. Now, on my Delta, yeah, I have a Delta that has the one that got a little plastic thing that clips on here, and then the belt comes out, and it's only like maybe a 1.5 inch or 2 inch, maybe the hose on.
Recommend adding another port on the bottom?
No, won't do any good.
I was just gonna
And a lot of them, you can't do that either way. Now, if I'm cutting up several boards and everything, and I've got the dust collection on, it's pulling up some on there, but the bottom of the saw itself, I'll get a pretty good pile. My door is on the side, where you open it up, and it's got an area, it's that wide and that deep in there for the 18-inch jet. But on that bottom of that, even with the dust collection on, I'll end up with, piles of dust on the bottom of that, but it's not getting all over me so bad. Well, the one on the Delta, it's dropping down through here, and this thing here where it's going on to, it's a couple inches, it's right in front of the blade, but it's about this far down from the table. So whatever's coming down, it's got some suction there, it'll drop down, and I hooked mine with one of the silent vacuum cleaner like we have back there, the quiet ones. That's what I use with it. I have it hooked to it, so when I turn on the saw, that comes out at the same time. It does a pretty good job of collecting stuff, but all it's collecting is the stuff that falls down here. Anything that's chipping out from the blade is going to go flying either way. It doesn't matter what you put on. And when I'm done, I still have to sweep up around, and I still have to clean up the top. But if I don't do that, I have a lot bigger mess. So, it does help a lot. And I try using dust collection on everything I can. Especially, one thing that does help though, it's not getting all the chips and stuff out of it, but you're getting a lot of stuff that's getting out of the air when you're using it. When I'm out there in that dust collection, and if you cut an MDF or something like that, this fine powder's all over the place, and that little suction there, as small as it is, it'll get most of that out of the air. So you're going to have a mess, but you're not breathing, and that's the part that's going to hurt you.
Well, I have a Rikon 14-inch, and it's got the bearings for the guides. Would it be advantage to go to the Carter system, even with that being there?
Cutter System's got two systems on it. You have one that is for resawing, and then you have one for making turns and stuff. The one that has a single part on the top, now I went to that one because I'm not going to use that saw for resawing. I have the Delta that's a 14-inch, and I put the smaller blades on. I usually have like a 1/4 inch or something like that, 3/16, 1/4 inch, and I can use that for making really sharp turns. So I use that on here. If you're going to do resawing, they have a part on it there is one on the top and the bottom, and you put that thing on there, and it would work good. What I do like about the one that I'm using on there with the Carter system, on the top, you put that on and you put tension on it, you're actually deflecting the blade out about a 1/4 inch or so from its path. So you're holding it out in place, and it has a roller on the end, like your thrust bearing that you have on here. It actually rides. That thrust bearing's got a line in the center with a groove on it, and your blade is riding inside of there. And you don't have one on the bottom, so you're not making them even with each other. You're not worrying about the blocks on the side. All you got touching is this one thrust bearing. You take everything else, you take them off, and you put them out of the way, because you'll disassemble this, take out these parts and put that on. And with that tension on there, pushing forward, I can make beautiful cuts with it, nice and soft. Now before I did that, when I had the cool blocks, I could not control a cut with that thing. My cool blocks weren't any good, and I didn't want to buy new ones, but it wasn't doing good. I put that one on there, and I added the tension to it. Now without the tension, you got some play on there, but you're actually deflecting the blade. If you look at it from the front there as you're doing it, when you got it up, you're actually pushing the blade deliberately out, out of the path. And I forget how much it says, like 3/16 to a 1/4 inch. And then you put that on there, I get beautiful cuts with it.
Yeah, I've got that. You're twisting the blade, and I've used it with like a 3/16 and you can cut a circle almost the diameter of the blade with thickness with that system. It works. You can get some really fine, sharp turns with that system. It works well.
Yeah, you have to go at it slower, but you can make a sharper turn than what I would think I could do. I tried it with when I used the cool blocks and using the smaller blades like that, and the blades were just slipping off out of place completely. I could not make a sharp turn at all. In fact, if I started doing a sharp turn, I just get jammed up in there. It wouldn't do any good. So it works good.
My answer to your question on that, Jerry, would be if you've got the Rikon now that already has bearings on it, that's probably quite good for general purpose use. Unless you've got some specialized reason that you're gonna be doing, nothing but resaw with the thing, then I might consider some kind of aftermarket.
Carter system talked about all the time.
Right.
The cutter system is good, but when you look at what's coming out now, the Jet and the Powermatic and a lot of them are coming with these roller systems. Some of them, like this one, might actually be Carter because it's a Carter thing on there. But if you go out there, these rollers aren't any different than what's going to come in Carter as far as this part goes. All you're going to do is have your rollers and put it in between there. My Jet's got, like I said, my Jet roller is about that thick.
Mine seem to be about the same size as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually two bearings stacked together on there.
Yes.
They're the same bearings they use in inline skates.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you've got tool blocks, I would recommend going to the Carter system with the bearings. I think the bearings are much better because the tool blocks, they're going to wear over time and they're going to widen that gap, so you're going to have to be constantly adjusting them. With the bearings, you adjust them once and they stay, and they're going to stay that same distance. You're not going to wear that metal because it's spinning. So it's going to give you a much truer track over a longer period of time. And I think that's the only advantage of the Carter system is it is a roller system. It's better over the tool block. If you've got more rollers, don't change unless you want that scrolling attachment like we were talking about earlier. That is worth doing.
Yeah. If you're using, if you don't use your bandsaw much, though, there's nothing wrong with cold blocks. If you're not using it that much, I would not go out to. I mean, that Carter system's not cheap. For you to get the top and bottom for the resaw one, it's like $200. The one on the top was like 70 something for just the one for normal turning. So, I mean, it's a beautiful system, but if you've got cool blocks and I use my bandsaw 3 or 4 times a day. But if you're not doing it that much and occasionally you want to cut something with it, I wouldn't spend the money for an upgrade for that.
I bought a bandsaw that's got the Carter system on it, and I actually like that bearing system better because the Carter, you've got to manually slide the bearings to adjust them off the blade, where if it's got that eccentric, it's a lot easier to get that right and then get the screw tightened.
Well, this your adjustments on here are different on every one. You got to loosen it up, and then you have a knurled nut on here, or I guess the end of a bolt. That's what you do for adjusting it in and out. Like if you going from a 1/2 inch to 3/4 like this, you loosen everything up and you turn this up. You've got to move this whole assembly moves back. Now after the whole assembly moves back, that aligns these, so you've got them sitting there where the rollers are in back of the gullet, so that you're not touching there. So you want to have the biggest part on here and back of there, but that's all adjusted with it. But they're different on every bandsaw, so you'll just have to look at it. We did get out the manual, which is odd for a guy. We did get out the manual. We made sure what blade size was the biggest you could put on there and different information on it. And like I said, on something like this, Bob was talking about the teeth that are in there at one time. A 3/4 inch blade, you're going to have about 2 teeth in here and the other one coming out each time. So it's cleaning itself out the gullet. And like you said, if you use a finer blade, if you're doing 3/4 inch wood, you could have like a 8 or 10 teeth per inch. It does do a fine cut. But if you're doing something like this, that's 4 inches thick, you got that much, and there's no way of clearing all that stuff out of the gullet as you go through. It's got to wait till it gets through there. So if you're using the 3 teeth per inch, you've got a bigger gap that's in between there, and it won't hurt anything. Because that thing's moving fast. It's very sharp. Yeah. So anyway. Anybody else got any questions?
I think I found that whenever you're cutting a lot of curves, say using a 3/8 or smaller blade and doing a lot of curves, that the key to keeping from binding and burning and doing all that kind of thing is constantly feeding the blade into the material. If you're in there and you're trying to make a turn and you're not feeding it, you're just making the turn, you're going to scorch something or bend the blade or something.
Yeah, you have to keep a constant pressure. Even if you're cutting straight on a table saw. If you're going straight on a table saw and you push it and you stop for a second, it's going to make a little mark. You might not see it much, but if you got really fine wood and you're trying to do a sharp cut, so you can't stop. You want to go push it straight through. And the same thing with a bandsaw. If you get a good curve to it, it's like when we were cutting out the puzzles the other day for the thing there. I try and get almost like you're skating. I go out there and I just try and go around and around and keep it going. Now, if I stop in the middle, especially using the spiral blades, if I stop in the middle and restart, there's a good chance I'm going to be off my path. So like you're saying, when you go to do that, just keep it as constant as you can, the constant pressure. But every time you ease up, you're going to leave a mark on the wood. So, any more questions? Okay, go home.